Hello and welcome to the Executive Pill, the podcast where brilliant leaders from every corner of the world share their secrets to help you lead smarter, influence better, and succeed faster. Think of it as your cheat code for navigating leadership with clarity and confidence. I am your host, Alex D. Tremble, CEO of GPS Leadership Solutions, and over the past decade, I've had the privilege of helping executives at Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and so many other organizations navigate leadership, influence, and culture. This podcast is your shortcut to learning what works from the best of the best. And I promise you this. What you're about to hear today is not theory. It's proven strategies that you can use today. And before we jump in, here's a tiny request with a massive impact. Please, please, please do hit that like button. Why? Because we live in the attention economy. Your click is the fuel that powers these life-changing ideas to reach more and more people. You're not just liking, you're leading a movement. Pretty powerful for one click, right? Now, let's make today extraordinary together. Today we have with us the amazing Miss Allison Windon. She currently serves as the head of go-to-market strategy, marketing, and pre-sales at Paylocity, a leading SaaS provider in the human capital management space. She is responsible for a team focused on evolving and supporting the execution of their sales strategies and enabling sales with tools, resources, and trainings needed to maximize success. Prior to this role, she served in a number of senior executive level roles at organizations such as Qualtrics, AGCS, and Fireman's Fund Insurance Company. This woman is honestly amazing. There's nothing else you can say, just amazing. And we have the pleasure to have her with us today. How are you doing, madam?
I'm wonderful and I'm blushing, Alex. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
I, I'm blushing too. You just can't see it. Um, See, that's a joke for those who are watching the YouTube video. Um, you know, I know a question I wanted to ask you jumping into this conversation, but because you and I have been talking for such a long time, I feel like we're friends. And I wanted to share a thought that popped in my head with you. So, this morning as I was preparing, I thought of this weird instance where the other day, so I started my career doing executive leadership development. I started that when I was 23 years old, which made no sense. And you know that because you also started off your your career at a really young age doing some amazing stuff. And so when you walk into those rooms, especially with those senior level executives, it was easy for me to say, okay, Alex, I need to act older. I gotta act like I belong there. Let me make sure I belong there. And then I was always kind of surprised that they accepted me. Like they felt like I belonged there. But I still had that feeling. I had to act like I'm the young guy. Let me make sure they understand it. I know what I'm talking about. And the other day I was in a room with these amazing leaders. And I was thinking the same thing, like, oh, okay, Alex, you're the young guy, and I'm talking about and making references. And then it clicked. I'm not the young guy anymore. I, I guess I do belong here. Uh, what was interesting about that is, I guess for me, as you navigate, as you elevate throughout your career and your life, we can sometimes have a view of ourself that doesn't keep up with what we've actually accomplished and where we actually are in life. Do you find that interesting, or does that even make sense? I don't know.
Oh, it makes absolute sense, Alex. I think I'd shared, I started my career at Capital One and came into a leadership role in day one. So I walked into a room of every single individual on my team being older than me and looking at me saying, "You have zero experience. How are you going to be able to lead this team?" And there was certainly an imposter syndrome there that can certainly carry throughout your whole career. But I think as you learn and you get repetitions and you understand your superpowers and how those can actually help people, it helps to break through. But when you start your career at a young age and you're in a leadership role so early in your career, it certainly can lead to that feeling. And then you get to the moment when you're later in your career and say, oh, wait. I'm actually the most experienced person in this room. The tides have changed, and then you have a certain appreciation for the up and comers in the organization, and take extra care in making them feel empowered
Yeah.
and putting them into a position where they can be super successful, and hopefully avoid a little bit of that imposter syndrome.
It, again, this is why you and I are kindred spirits. Um, so then that leads me to the question I was looking forward to asking you, which is what's the what's the best or worst advice that you've received? Who was it from and why was it the best or worst?
So I'm actually going to give you two answers. I hope that's not cheating.
Let's do this.
So the first was from Jennifer Tornaden, who was a leader that I worked with when I was at Zurich, and I was on a hamster wheel, really trying to execute day in and day out, and it came time to take a vacation, and I said, "Oh, Jennifer, we've got this going on and that going on. I can certainly stay back and adjust my flight schedule." And she said, "Allison, we're not saving lives here. You need to be able to take a moment, step away, and have perspective, and you'll come back refreshed and actually be able to execute at an even higher level." And I just thought that that was such great wisdom to
Yeah,
share, with somebody who, I consider myself a type A personality, somebody who is always wanting to achieve, but you need to have moments where you pause, take a step back, and there's never a good time to schedule a vacation, to schedule having a baby, any of those things.
what?
Life gets in the way of work, but it's actually, there's a way to really embrace that and be able to hit the pause button every so often. So that's the first piece of advice, which I think was really useful. The second came from my dad. I was looking at different opportunities in my career, and my dad was a uh, a cable installer who worked his way up through the ranks of the organization to ultimately become the president and CEO of the organization. And so he had always had this very linear path that he had gone on and had taken the ladder straight up. Um, and I was considering a move in my career, and it was going to be a sidestep, looking into a role that was in a different function, that would give me different experiences. But it felt like, because it wasn't a step forward, that it was a step back. And
Mm,
the advice that my father gave to me was, you don't always have to take a linear path with your career.
yeah.
Sometimes those side steps, or even a step back, can actually be a leap forward in your next role, and gives you a much broader view on the organization, or even moving into a different organization, when you're able to really take a variety of experiences to make you an even better and even richer executive in the long run. And I think that was amazing experience, and a really good advice that I certainly followed from my dad.
So those are really two extremely impactful pieces of advice. Um, I gotta pick a route to go with. So let's go with the first advice. What is really interesting is I used to always say that too, and in regards to we're not saving lives and so on and so forth. And it's funny because one time I was leading this discussion in a group of emergency managers, and I said that because I was like, you all, you have to make sure you have time for yourself, da, 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 and slow down. And they were like, oh, actually, yeah, you are saving lives. Um, but, but the funny part about that is that even though I had a little bit of pushback in the beginning, I was able to say, but don't y'all have like problems that happen? Like, doesn't someone get sick and they can't be there? Can't like doesn't something always happen that does require you to figure it out without that person anyways? And they're like, yeah. So that means that you can take some time. You can pause because you will figure it out. But if you act as if you can't, you won't. Right?
Absolutely. And I think it also gives you an opportunity in that scenario too, where you need to be in a position where you can rely on your peers,
Mhm.
rely on your team,
Yeah.
and know that you've put them into a position to be successful
Mhm.
so that you can take those moments for yourself because they're going to happen to you or they are going to happen by choice.
hmm Well, I mean, this makes me think about the Eisenhower model, right? Where there's things that are important and urgent, and they're important, um, things that are urgent and not important, and so on and so forth. And the reality is that most of us spend our time focused on firefighting, so things that are
Mhm.
both important and urgent. And we think, okay, well, this is urgent, gotta get it done. This is important, gotta get it. And the reality is that yes, those things are important and they're urgent, so you got to get them done. There is a time frame on it. However, if you look at our lives and the programs and the things that we do for our organizations, it's generally those things that are important but not urgent that actually have a massive impact on our organization. And but the problem is because they're not urgent, because there's nothing pressing you to do it, you don't implement it. So that new system, that new process, that like you said, building the systems in place so that if something does happen to you, everything will be okay. But we don't prioritize those, generally speaking, because they're not the fire that I got to put out right now. So, I mean, I see you shaking your head. How do you find time to work on those things that are important but not urgent?
That's a great question. And that's always a struggle, especially when you move into an organization and there's a lot of things to address. I think the way that I approach that is taking a look at all of the jobs to be done,
Hmm.
and all of the issues and opportunities that exist, and mapping out, and really discreetly identifying those things that are urgent and important, but the things that are important as well that aren't necessarily urgent, and building out a plan because you have to pace those things out so that you can execute on them so that they don't turn into the urgent and important items as well. So I think it's all in being super planful. I'm a data geek. I like to look at, what are some of the things that are emerging that we need to look at in the marketing world. We have so many different channels nowadays that we need to pay attention to. And at times you can be in reactive mode, but I have an excellent team that I've put in place that can monitor and be looking out for things that are urgent and important, but also have a really concrete strategy in terms of how we want to position ourselves, who we want to be in the space. And I think that's important for individuals as well, right? You need to have your plan in place. You need to make sure that you're pacing against that plan while at the same time you are continuing to address the fires that pop up because you need to reserve capacity for fires because they are inevitably going to be there. So that's a bit of how I approach that personally, and then also look at that across my organization.
I really love, well, one, everything you said, but also the intentionality that we should have as leaders about building in capacity because fires will happen. If you are so full to the brim consistently all the time and something happens, what are you going to do? Um, and I tell people, like, there's this funny story I kind of utilize. I won't go into it today, but the point being that if I were to ask Allison, like, hey, how many hours of work do you work? How many hours do you work in a day? She was like, okay, I work 26 hours. Joking, but
It can feel like that sometimes, but
so Alan says whatever number of hours that she works. Okay, so how much time do you spend sleeping? Okay, how much time do you spend eating? How time do you spend talking to your family, hanging? Like, if I asked her all those questions and she gave percentages, we would have a full day. And the whole point behind asking those questions is to make sure everyone's on the same page that there is no such thing as free time. Like, free time is a myth, right? Because every single hour, minute, and second of your day is being utilized by something. So when something is added to your plate, you don't get an additional hour. You don't get 26 hours in a day now. You don't 27. You have to remove something off the plate and or reduce the quality and effort being put towards something. And so I love that you said keeping some capacity, because when something does come on, you now have the flexibility to act on that without necessarily impacting quality and effort on the other things that are important to you. Is that what I'm hearing too?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. And it's not always easy, but when I take a look at a week, for example, there are times that I will explicitly block out so that I can save that for the hot topic that comes up
Yeah.
du jour, or to actually have focused thinking and working time. But I also, schedule in the things that I want to make sure that I take care of personally as well. This is soccer season. So when I can, I have all of my daughter's soccer's games on the calendar so that
Mhm.
I can see that and make a choice to attend the games when I can, or have a conversation with her and say, "Hey, Mags, I know you have a game tomorrow that I'm not going to be able to attend. I'm so excited for you. I'm going to be watching Game Changer while I'm in that meeting. I can't leave." Right.
Yeah.
So being
Yeah.
super intentional also in my personal life, and making sure, because as you said, you only have that 24 hours in a day, and making sure that you're blocking the time and the space for family as well has been really important, because the old idea of work life balance is really a bit arcane in my view. I think it's all about work life integration
Yeah.
and how you take a look at blending things together when you can, and being super intentional about having that focused time with family, with friends, or even time to get things done around the house. Making sure that you understand and sort of block that out either mentally or physically on a calendar.
See, and again, I'm not sure if everyone. I'm really hoping everyone is picking up what you're laying down. And again, this word. This is why I think why you're so good at what you do, and why you've elevated so quickly across your career, consistently just doing amazing stuff. Is this word intentionality? Um, I interviewed the current COO for Drive Time, which is actually really cool. I see their commercials every once in a while. Like, hey, I interviewed. What's it called? and and she talked about the same thing exactly. She using the example of her daughter, her daughter's, I don't know what sport she was in, but again, making intentional decision to either attend or not attend, and having that conversation, but making the decision versus just going through life missing stuff, not missing stuff, and just the opportunity to have that conversation. I think it probably means a lot to your daughter. Like, okay,
Mhm.
your mom didn't forget; she's aware of it. It's just this time, or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
You also, so again, my background is in executive leaders development, and I spent a lot of time in the HR and the culture space. And what I have found is any effort um, any change effort, anything you want to implement across an organization, even for yourself, actually, um, if you're not thinking about communications, you're not thinking about marketing, you're not thinking about selling if it's not a product or it could be an idea, then you're not setting yourself up for much success, or at least you're setting yourself up for a bit more difficult time. So I'd like to ask you, given that that is your space, going to go to market, sales, marketing, what should people be thinking about in regards to those skills? What hat should they be having on if they are not a marketing and or go to sales, go to um, uh, sorry, a salesperson or a marketing person, or go to market person? What should they be thinking as just an executive leader wherever they are?
Mm. So I always start with, what is the outcome I'm looking to drive? And often in the space of go to market, it is, what are you trying to improve, change, or transform for the customer? So always putting a customer hat on and working backwards from there, I think, is a really great starting point for anybody who is looking to get into marketing, get into sales, get into an enablement type role. So in my career, I actually focused, in my time at Qualtrics, on customer experience. And understanding the experiences of your customers. What are their blockers? What are the things that they're trying to accomplish in their day in and day out? And what are the solutions that you can bring to bear? And when you think about bridging that gap, either when you're carrying a bag as a salesperson or when you're positioning a value proposition as a product marketer, as an example. I think really taking a step back and understanding the jobs to be done for the ultimate customer that you're serving, and then being able to break down the parts and pieces of the solution that you're bringing to the table in a way that is going to resonate with that particular audience. So I think it's all about really tuning into the needs, asking excellent questions. I think everything comes down to as you're building a career and go to market, asking the right questions of your prospects and customers is so mission critical, because that's how you get to those baseline needs that are so critical to then build the solution for. So I would say the key of getting into a space like that is really being able to ask the right questions, and then being in a position to build out a set of solutions that are going to solve those problems or make or accelerate the jobs to be done for the ultimate customer you're looking to serve.
So, to your point, it sounds like that is something that a skill that every executive, whether you are a COO, whether you're in operations, whether you're in IT, whether you're whatever you're doing, it behooves you to truly pause to really understand your customer. And you talked about questions. How do you how do you develop the right questions? How have you figured out what questions to ask? The reality is that you can't ask your customer 1,000 questions. They'll turn it off, right? Even internal surveys for employees and evaluations, you can't ask a million questions. So how do you determine which questions are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck when trying to understand your customer?
Great question, Alex. I think the first, like, biggest and most important key is to do your homework first, right?
Mm,
We live in an environment where there is tons of information and data about the individual you're going to be speaking with and the organization that they support. So if you come in and you ask questions that you already should know the answers to, then you're going to put yourself into a position where somebody's going to tune out immediately.
mm,
So doing your homework, but I think also once you do your homework and you're able to then identify, okay, here's the master set of questions that I need to understand to do my job. And this can be with internal customers as well, as you mentioned. If you're a COO, understanding what you need to do to serve the organization in a better way in each of the constituencies. So building out a profile and understanding and doing your research, developing that master set of questions and ticking off the things that you don't need to ask. And that will give you the subset of the most mission critical answers that you need to get. Now you can break those out and build those out over time. So think about layering in the responses, right? What do I need to know in meeting one to make that second meeting
mm,
even more impactful? So as we think about in the SaaS space, you typically will have a first time appointment where you'll get to know one another, share a little bit of your perspective on their organization, share a little bit about your organization, and use that as an opportunity to build out a really great demo or
yeah.
solutions presentation, right? You don't have to come into those scenarios with all of the answers either. You have to be curious throughout an entire process to really ultimately land in a place where you deeply understand the person on the other side. So I would say do your research, chunk it out into the sets of questions that are most important at each point in time, and then ultimately think of layering all of those responses in to ultimately build out the best solution and a really full and rich profile of that individual or that organization. And at the end of the day, everything's about relationship, right?
Mm,
No, don't just think about having to understand the ins and outs of how payroll runs through a
yeah.
system, but think about who is that person who's responsible for payroll at the organization? What makes them tick? How can you make them look like a superstar and make them super successful, right? And that ultimately is how you can build and win champions within organizations.
You just said so much, and I agree with all of it. One of the things you mentioned, again, one of the many things you just mentioned is, I'm going to say this. This is me saying this. Don't attribute this to her. Um, there are stupid questions.
There are. I agree.
Okay, I didn't want
No,
to put you.
I agree.
So I love that you said, start with doing your homework. Doesn't mean you'll know everything, but you should at least have a baseline, right, before you walk into these conversations, and it lets people know that you've taken this seriously. Um, the other thing you talked about was making people look good. I can't remember this actual story, but there's this story about this guy in another country. I'm butchering this now, but but this woman met with these two people who were running for office, and the woman came back and said, "Oh, the first person I made, um, I understand he's really smart. From that conversation, I know he's really smart." And then she met with the other guy, and she came back from that conversation and said, "From that conversation, he made me feel really smart." Right? The difference between making it about you versus making it about the other person. And I think that's how I've lived my life, as well as what I recommend, and everyone I coach and work with, which is, how do I make my boss look good? How do I make my colleagues look good? How do I make my the people who work with me look good? If I can do all of that, I'm sure I'll look good. But if I focus on myself, uh, it, that may not end up well. I want to ask you another question, but literally, it made me think about something. There's an individual who I know, and who was a really, really great leader, had great ideas. And long story short, he worked those ideas, had a really great new strategy for the organization. And he was one executive of a cadre of a larger executive group. And he put these ideas together. He was really excited about it. And then he presented it to the group, and everyone shot it down.
Hmm.
It was so poorly received that literally it cost him a promotion, a big promotion he was going to get. And in retrospect, what we found was that instead of keeping the idea to himself and trying to just kind of present it to everyone, say, "Hey, look what I created. This is what we're going to do." He really should have been shopping that idea around, engaging people, getting them on board before the meetings, before the meeting, right? Um, have you? How, how do you go about gaining support for initiatives and things that are important to you, from your executive peers who are at the same level, who have just as
Mhm.
much influence in this thing as you?
Oh gosh, I think that's probably one of the things in my career that I've honed the most, because I worked in really large global organizations, and understanding what the motivations and what the benefits of your ideas are for your peers and for other parts of the organization is so critical. Uh,
Hmm.
the last, 3 roles that I've had a blank sheet of paper. And when you go from a blank sheet of paper to building out a fully structured and well running organization, it takes a lot of that uh, consensus building, and working with your peers to really understand how can what I am building serve you and serve your needs, and giving people an opportunity to have input early on in a process, I think, is mission critical. I like to think of building ideas and building organizations in phases. In that first phase, I think coming in with a hypothesis is always critical. Having just a plain blank sheet of paper is never going to lead to a really fruitful and productive conversation with your peers.
Hmm.
So taking that hypothesis, then working that hypothesis, and committing to come back with the idea or the solution built out in more detail to get a response in that next phase. And as you go from that first phase of sound basing the initial idea with your peers or with your CEO, and coming into that next meeting, you have to have a lot of iterations. And I like to use even my external board of directors, right, to say, hey, these are the problems we're trying to solve for our organization. I'd like to take an outside in view of some of the
Yeah.
solutions that I've built here, and working with your team, so that the folks who report into you, to make sure that you get buy-in once you do launch what ultimately is a new organization or a new idea. But then that next meeting, which is before a final presentation, with a smaller subset of your peers and your CEO, to really present the solution and get a little bit of feedback that you can turn left or turn right on, but you know that you've got it 80% baked at
Yeah.
that point, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, then you walk into a meeting like that, everybody's already head nodding because they've had input into the presentation. They've had input into the organization. They have had their opportunity to shape the early stage idea, the 80% baked idea, and that ultimately presented solution it has their fingerprints on it. And I think making sure you give people an opportunity to put their fingerprint on something, especially when it's big,
Yeah.
is so critical as a change management process. And really thinking about and being intentional about change management is
Yeah.
hard sometimes for people. It's a practice I studied. I studied leadership studies in undergraduate at University of Richmond. Go Spiders! Um, and during the education that I got there, you get sort of the fundamentals. But when you go into a really large hierarchical organization where there's meetings before meetings before meetings, you learn
Mhm.
how critical it is to get the buy-in and consensus before you walk into that boardroom, as an example, and present the ultimate solution.
You know, again, I hope everyone's really, really sucking this in and absorbing this. One of the things, one of my favorite stories is to share because for about my life, um, again, 23 years old, managing executive leadership development and having to navigate organizational politics that early in life. The thing that made me so good at it was my supervisor, who was the executive at that time. He would just take me to every single executive level meeting he could. Um, Not for me to weigh in and say anything, but just to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the meeting, we go back to his office, and he asked me, "Okay, so what happened? Okay, service level. Okay, this happened. We decided this. This person. Like, cool. Okay, now what happened below the surface? All the politics. Oh, that person didn't support the initiative because last year they did this to this other person, or they took this person's resources. Oh, why are they supporting this? It didn't make sense for them to support. Oh, because they're actually working together on this other thing over here. And like, so that taught me so much. And so now I do my best to implement that into programs that we do for pipeline development for executive levels. It's just, we know how important political savvy is, like you said, building those coalitions, but we don't actively teach and mentor that stuff. We just kind of hope that people figure it out somehow, which is not the most effective way to do this. You are freaking amazing, Allison. I'm, I kind of hope I can use the word freaking. You're
Absolutely, please.
So everyone, again, as always, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you doing us a favor and clicking that like, and make sure you don't just look back, reach back. Bring someone else to the table who you feel who would actually benefit from this conversation. Because again, if you took something from it, I promise you they would as well. So as always, I encourage everyone, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving. See ya.
Thank
Thanks for listening to The Executive Appeal with Alex Tremble. I invite you to follow The Executive Appeal wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow me, your host, Alex Tremble, across all socials or via email for exclusive webinars, courses, and speaking engagements on continued topics of executive leadership. So until next time, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving.